At the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, an abandoned military base sits atop windswept cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Rusted radar towers loom over crumbling concrete bunkers. Warning signs mark old minefields. Boarded-up buildings slowly surrender to the elements. This is Camp Hero. And according to a legend that refuses to die, something terrible happened here. The story goes like this. Between 1971 and 1983, the U.S. government conducted secret experiments at this facility. They kidnapped runaway teenagers from New York City. They used mind control technology to erase memories and implant new ones. They developed time travel capabilities and opened portals to alternate dimensions. They worked with extraterrestrial beings. And they did all of this in vast underground laboratories hidden beneath the sand. This legend inspired books, documentaries, and even a hit television series. Millions of people believe some version of it is true. Online forums dissect every detail. Investigators search for evidence. Witnesses come forward with stories of abduction and experimentation. There's just one problem. None of it happened. The Montauk Project is a complete fabrication. It was invented by two men in the early 1990s, built on recovered memories that never existed, and spread through books explicitly marketed as a blend of science fiction or nonfiction. You decide. But here's what makes this story fascinating. While the Montauk Project never occurred, similar experiments did happen, just not at Montauk, and not the way the legend describes. The U.S. government really did conduct mind control experiments. The CIA really did test drugs on unwitting citizens. Children really were used in psychological research without consent. These programs were real, documented, and eventually exposed. The Montauk legend took fragments of actual Cold War horrors and twisted them into science fiction. And by doing so, it obscured the truth about what governments actually did in the name of national security. This is the story of the Montauk Project. Not the fantasy, but how the fantasy was created, why people believed it, and what really happened at Camp Hero. And more importantly, what really happened elsewhere. To understand why the Montauk legend took hold, you first need to understand the real history of Camp Hero. Because that history is genuinely fascinating, and it provided just enough mystery to make the legend plausible. Camp Hero's strategic location made it militarily valuable for centuries. During the Revolutionary War, both British and American forces recognized that controlling Montauk Point meant controlling access to New York Harbor and Long Island Sound. But Camp Hero as a military installation really began in 1942. World War II had started, and German U-boats were devastating Allied shipping along the East Coast. Montauk, jutting into the Atlantic like a finger pointing toward Europe, was the perfect location for coastal defense. The U.S. Army established Camp Hero as a fortified position. They installed massive guns, 16-inch naval rifles, the same weapons used on battleships, in concrete bunkers designed to withstand direct hits. These guns could fire shells weighing over a ton more than 20 miles out to sea. Any German ship or submarine approaching New York would have to pass within range. But the Army knew the guns alone weren't enough. They needed Camp Hero to remain hidden. If the Germans knew exactly where the guns were located, they could target them from a distance or avoid the area entirely. They built an elaborate deception. Camp Hero was disguised as a small fishing village. Buildings were designed to look like Cape Cod-style houses with shutters and peaked roofs. The massive concrete bunkers had windows painted on them and decorative false facades. The gymnasium was built to look like a church, complete with a fake steeple. From the air or the sea, Camp Hero appeared to be nothing more than a quiet coastal community. The deception worked. German forces never attacked Montauk, though whether that was because of the disguise or because they simply had other priorities is unclear. After World War II ended, Camp Hero was briefly decommissioned. But the Cold War soon gave it new purpose that in 1951, the facility was transferred to the Air Force. The Soviet Union had developed long-range bombers capable of reaching the United States. Early warning of incoming Soviet attacks became a national priority. Camp Hero's location again proved valuable. It was one of the first places Soviet aircraft approaching from the Atlantic would cross. The Air Force installed radar systems. First came smaller units. Then, in the late 1950s, they built what became Camp Hero's most distinctive feature, the IN/FPS 35 radar tower. This structure was massive. A steel framework over 10 stories tall, supporting a radar dish the size of a building. The dish rotated constantly, scanning the skies for hundreds of miles in every direction. It was part of the SAGE system, semi-automatic ground environment, a network of radar stations connected to computers that could track Soviet bombers and coordinate defensive responses. This was cutting-edge technology for the late 1950s. The SAGE radar could detect aircraft at distances and altitudes that had been impossible just years earlier. Camp Hero became a key link in America's air defense network. The radar operated around the clock. Military personnel lived on base. The facility was high security, fences, guards, classified operations. Civilian access was prohibited. For the next 2 decades, Camp Hero functioned as a radar station. That's it. Personnel tracked aircraft, maintained equipment, and submitted reports. It was important work, but it was routine. No experiments. No underground laboratorios. No secret projects. Then came 1981. Advances in radar technology had made the massive SAGE stations obsolete. Smaller, more efficient systems could now do the same job. The Air Force decided Camp Hero was no longer needed. In 1981, the facility was officially decommissioned and abandoned. By 1984, the federal government was ready to dispose of the property. They attempted to sell it to real estate developers. But local environmental activists objected, arguing that Camp Hero contained unique ecosystems and rare wildlife species. After legal battles, most of the site was donated to New York State parks. Camp Hero remained largely undeveloped through the 1980s and 1990s. The building stood empty. The radar tower was locked behind fencing. Some areas were sealed off due to safety concerns. Unexploded ordnance, asbestos, structural decay. Warning signs proliferated. Trespassers occasionally broke in, but the site saw little activity. It was during these years of abandonment, when Camp Hero sat empty, mysterious, and off-limits, that the legend began. The Montauk Project legend has a specific origin point. A book published in 1992 called The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, written by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. Preston Nichols was the primary source of the claims. Born in 1946 on Long Island, Nichols claimed to have degrees in electrical engineering and psychology. More significantly, he claimed to have recovered repressed memories of his own involvement in secret experiments at Camp Hero. According to Nichols, he had worked at Camp Hero as an engineer during the 1970s and early 1980s. He described elaborate underground facilities, advanced technology, and horrific experiments. But he said his memories had been suppressed through mind control techniques, and only in the late 1980s had he begun to remember what had happened. His co-author, Peter Moon, real name Vincent Barbarick, helped shape these claims in a narrative form. Importantly, in their introduction, Nichols and Moon wrote, "Whether you read this as science fiction or nonfiction, you are in for an amazing story." This hedge, inviting readers to decide for themselves, would become crucial. It allowed the authors to make extraordinary claims while avoiding responsibility for proving them. What were those claims? According to Nichols, the Montauk Project built on another legendary conspiracy theory, the Philadelphia experiment. That 1943 legend, which we've already proven false in another documentary, alleged that the USS Eldridge disappeared from a Philadelphia shipyard and reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia. Nichols connected his Montauk story to the Philadelphia experiment by claiming that in 1943, the Eldridge had actually time-traveled to 1983, appearing briefly at Montauk. He claimed he personally witnessed this event and that it inspired the Montauk Project's research into time travel and dimensional portals. The Montauk experiments allegedly involved *** mind control *** using advanced electromagnetic technology to read and manipulate thoughts. The Montauk Boys. Nichols alleged that hundreds of runaway teenagers were abducted from New York City, brought to Camp Hero, and used in mind control experiments. He claimed many were psychologically destroyed or killed in elevators, invisible from the surface. These claims were extraordinary. They required evidence. But Nichols provided none. No photographs, no documents, no physical evidence, no corroboration from other witnesses, just his recovered memories and those of a handful of others who came forward after reading his books. One of those others was Al Bielek. After watching a 1988 science fiction movie called The Philadelphia Experiment, Bielek claimed he experienced sudden recall of repressed memories. He said he had been one of the sailors on the USS Eldridge in 1943 and had time traveled to Montauk in 1983. He supported and expanded on Nichols' claims. The problem? Al Bielek's real name was Edward Cameron. He was born in 1927, not 1916 as he claimed. He had never served on the USS Eldridge. His entire story was fabricated. So if the Montauk Project was complete fiction, why did millions of people believe it? The answer reveals how conspiracy theories gain traction and why they're so difficult to debunk. First, the story contained just enough truth to seem plausible. Camp Hero really was a military facility. It really was classified and off-limits to civilians for decades. The government really did conduct secret research during the Cold War. These facts provided a foundation of credibility. More importantly, the U.S. government really had conducted mind control experiments, just not at Montauk. From 1953 to 1973, the CIA operated Project MKUltra, a program that tested drugs, hypnosis, and psychological torture techniques on unwitting subjects. This was not conspiracy theory. This was documented fact, revealed by congressional investigations in the 1970s. MKUltra experiments included administering LSD to people without their knowledge or consent. CIA scientists drugged prisoners, mental patients, prostitutes, and even CIA employees themselves. In one case, a mental patient in Kentucky was given LSD for 174 consecutive days. Testing on vulnerable populations. The CIA targeted people who could not fight back: prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts, and the poor. Consent was rarely obtained. Participants often had no idea they were being experimented on. University research. Over 30 universities and institutions participated in MKUltra programs, often without knowing they were funded by the CIA. Research was conducted at hospitals, prisons, and psychiatric facilities. Deaths and permanent damage. At least one person, Army scientist Frank Olson, died after being secretly dosed with LSD by CIA colleagues. Others suffered lasting psychological damage. That MKUltra was real. It was horrific, and it remained largely hidden until investigative journalism and congressional hearings forced disclosure in the 1970s. When Preston Nichols claimed the government conducted secret mind control experiments. He wasn't making up the general concept. He was taking a real program and transplanting it to Montauk, then adding science fiction elements like time travel. This technique, mixing documented facts with fabrication, makes conspiracy theories resistant to debunking. If you prove one element false, believers point to the true elements and say, "But we know the government did similar things elsewhere." Second, the Montauk story exploited Cold War anxieties. People who lived through the Cold War understood that governments operated in secrecy. They knew about classified programs, hidden facilities, and operations that only came to light years later. This history of genuine secrecy made additional secret projects seem plausible. Third, the abandoned Camp Hero looked the part. Visitors who ventured onto the site found eerie, decaying buildings, sealed bunkers, warning signs about unexploded ordnance. A massive radar tower still standing decades after the base closed. Why was the radar dish still there? Why were some buildings sealed with welded doors rather than demolished? To conspiracy theorists, these details seemed suspicious. Why maintain security if the site was truly abandoned? The answer was mundane: environmental hazards. The buildings contained asbestos. Some areas had underground fuel storage tanks that leaked. The radar tower was simply expensive to dismantle and posed no immediate threat. Keeping certain buildings sealed prevented trespassers from encountering hazards. But mundane explanations don't satisfy people looking for mysteries. Fourth, popular culture amplified the legend. The Montauk Project inspired the Netflix series Stranger Things. The show was initially titled Montauk during development. Although the final show changed locations and never explicitly referenced Camp Hero, viewers familiar with the legend saw the connections: a girl with psychic powers, secret government experiments, alternate dimensions. Stranger Things introduced Montauk-style conspiracy theories to millions of people who had never heard of Preston Nichols. And when those people searched online for Montauk experiments, they found Nichols' books and websites treating the story as fact. Fifth, the absence of evidence was reframed as evidence. When investigators found no proof of underground laboratories, conspiracy theorists said this proved the cover-up was effective. When government agencies denied the Montauk Project existed, believers said this proved the conspiracy went to the highest levels. Every piece of contradictory evidence was reinterpreted as confirmation. This is the hallmark of unfalsifiable conspiracy theories. They're structured so that any evidence against them is treated as evidence for them. You can't win. So what actually occurred at Camp Hero? The documented history is straightforward. Camp Hero functioned as a coastal artillery installation during World War II, then as a radar station during the Cold War. It was decommissioned in 1981, donated to New York State Parks in 1984, and opened as Camp Hero State Park in 2002. No experiments were conducted there. No underground laboratories existed. No children were kidnapped. No time travel research occurred. Every government document related to Camp Hero has been declassified and is available through Freedom of Information Act requests. These records show routine military operations, personnel assignments, equipment maintenance, radar operations, nothing more. Multiple environmental and archaeological surveys have been conducted at the site. Ground-penetrating radar, soil testing, and structural assessments found no evidence of hidden facilities, radiation, or experimental equipment. The buildings that Preston Nichols claimed were entrances to underground labs. They're old equipment sheds, generator buildings, and storage facilities. They're sealed because they contain asbestos or structural damage, not because they hide secret elevators. The mysterious food orders that conspiracy theorists point to as evidence of hidden personnel, those were for a Job Corps training center that operated nearby in the 1980s, completely unrelated to any military activity. The psychedelic wallpaper that believers say was used in LSD experiments. It's graffiti added by trespassers years after the base closed. Every piece of evidence for the Montauk Project has a mundane explanation. But, and this is crucial, while the Montauk Project never happened, similar programs did MKUltra really tested mind control techniques. The CIA really administered drugs to unwitting citizens. Research really was conducted at universities, prisons, and hospitals across the country. Children really were used in experiments without proper consent. These programs weren't at Montauk, but they were real, and that's the tragedy of the Montauk legend. By focusing on a fictional conspiracy theory at an abandoned radar station, attention has been diverted from the actual horrific experiments that governments conducted. MKUltra destroyed lives. People died. Others suffered permanent psychological damage. Families never received answers about what happened to their loved ones. And all of this is documented, proven, and admitted. The Montauk Project is fiction, but it's fiction built on a foundation of very real atrocities. Today, Camp Hero State Park is open to the public. Hikers walk the trails. Bird watchers scan the cliffs. Families picnic near the old bunkers. The radar tower still stands, a silent monument to Cold War anxieties. And people still come looking for evidence of the Montauk Project. They search for sealed tunnels. They photograph the radar tower, convinced it holds secrets. They share theories online. Despite overwhelming evidence that the Montauk Project never occurred, the legend persists. This persistence reveals something important about how we process information in an age of conspiracy theories that we're drawn to mysteries. We want to believe in hidden truths. We're suspicious of official accounts, especially when governments have proven they hide information and conduct secret programs. All of these impulses are understandable, even justified, given historical examples of government deception. But there's a difference between healthy skepticism and believing claims without evidence. The Montauk Project asks us to believe extraordinary claims, time travel, mind control, interdimensional portals, based solely on recovered memories from people who provided no physical proof. It asks us to ignore the complete absence of documentary evidence, the impossibility of the described technology, and the contradictions in witness accounts. Skepticism means demanding evidence. It means accepting mundane explanations when they fit the facts. It means not assuming conspiracy simply because a place looks mysterious or a story sounds compelling. The real tragedy of the Montauk legend is that it obscures actual history. MKUltra was real. Unethical government experiments were real. Vulnerable people really were exploited in the name of national security. These true stories deserve attention. The victims deserve recognition. The systems that allowed these programs to occur deserve scrutiny. But those conversations get derailed when people focus on fictional projects at abandoned radar stations instead of documented atrocities in CIA files. Preston Nichols died in 2018. He never recanted his claims. He maintained until the end that his memories of Montauk were real. Whether he believed his own story or whether it was deliberate fabrication, we'll never know for certain. What we do know is that evidence matters. Documentation matters. Physical proof matters. And when those things are absent, we should be skeptical, not because we trust authority blindly, but because truth requires evidence. The Montauk Project never happened. But the human tendency to believe compelling stories over uncomfortable facts, that's very real. And that's the lesson Camp Hero offers. Not about secret experiments or government conspiracies, but about the importance of demanding evidence before accepting extraordinary claims. Because when we chase fiction, we ignore truth. And truth, even uncomfortable truth, is what allows us to learn from the past and prevent its repetition. The radar tower at Camp Hero still stands. But it's a monument to Cold War technology, not to time travel. The bunkers are sealed, but because of asbestos, not because of underground laboratories. The site is mysterious because it's abandoned, not because experiments occurred there. Sometimes the truth is less exciting than the legend. But it has one advantage, that it's true.